Usually when we dig into music history, the map looks, well, pretty standard.
Right.
We talk about Detroit for techno, Chicago for house, maybe, Berlin or London. But today, I was looking at the source you brought in, this Chronicle by MMR, and the map is just completely different.
It is. We're looking at a genre that didn't start in a sterile studio or some urban warehouse.
Oh.
It started on the sand.
Literally on the beach. We're talking about Psy-Trance or psychedelic trance.
Yeah.
And I have to be honest, before reading this, my assumption about it was pretty limited. I pictured neon spandex, dreadlocks, and, well, music that goes a million miles an hour.
Which, isn't entirely wrong, strictly speaking.
Sure. But the article frames it as this massive 50-year saga that's actually about technology and consciousness expansion. That's a pretty lofty goal for dance music.
It is, but that's the unique selling point of this entire movement. It claims to be more than just entertainment. The music is framed as a tool, a vehicle, really, to get you out of your normal headspace and into something else. And to understand that, we have to look at how the technology evolved right alongside that spiritual goal.
So we're tracking a journey from, acoustic guitars on a beach in India, all the way to artificial intelligence in the 2020s.
That's the arc. From analog to algorithm.
Let's start at the beginning then. The source material paints this picture of Goa, India in the 1970s. I think most people know Goa was a hippie haven. But I'm trying to wrap my head around the logistics of it. You've got travelers, spiritual seekers, and electronic music. In 1970s India.
It was a very specific convergence. Goa was a former Portuguese colony, so it had this slightly different cultural vibration than the rest of India. By the 70s, it became the end of the line for the hippie trail.
Right, I've heard of it.
People were literally driving vans from Europe through the Middle East and just ended up in Goa.
So they arrive, they're looking for enlightenment, but how do we get to synthesizers? I can't imagine the power grid on some remote beach was reliable enough to run a Moog.
Oh, it wasn't. Not at all. At first, it was just rock music, the Grateful Dead, Pink Floyd, that sort of thing. But these travelers were obsessed with the new. They would fly back to Europe or Japan, buy the latest, weirdest electronic gear they could find, drum machines, synths, and just bring them back to the beach.
So it's just a potluck of noise.
In a way. But it created this incredible feedback loop. You had the Eastern influence, local Indian classical music, the spirituality, even the humidity colliding with this cold, robotic Western technology.
Speaking of that collision, there was one name in this article that just stopped me dead in my tracks. Charanjit Singh.
Ah, yes.
I had never heard this name before, but the timeline here, it seems impossible.
This is one of my favorite aha moments in all of music history. It just breaks the standard narrative.
Okay, so lay it out for me. The article mentions an album, 10 Ragas to a Disco Beat, released in 1982.
That's right, 1982. Charanjit Singh was a Bollywood session musician. He wasn't a raver. He wasn't trying to invent a new drug culture. He just bought some new gear. A Roland Jupiter 8, a TR-808 drum machine, and most importantly, a Roland TB-303.
The 303, that's the little silver box that defines acid house, right? That squelchy bass sound.
The very one. Now, history usually tells us that guys in Chicago sort of discovered the weird sound of the TB-303 in the late 80s, but Singh was doing it in 1982.
So what was he trying to do?
He was trying to replicate Indian classical ragas, which are these very complex, fluid, melodic structures, using this rigid electronic bass sequencer.
So he's trying to make traditional Indian music on a robot, essentially.
And because the machine couldn't quite mimic the human nuance of a raga, it created this slippery, sliding, hypnotic electronic sound.
Wow.
If you listen to it today, it sounds like it could have been released in 1990, but nobody in the West heard it at the time. It was a commercial flop in India.
It's tragic and amazing. She accidentally invented the future while trying to recreate the past.
It really shows that the ingredients for this Goa sound were just floating in the ether. By the time we get to the late 80s and early 90s, the electronic sound had fully taken over the beaches.
Which brings us to Goa Trance.
The birth of it.
The classic 1990 to 94 era. The full moon parties. Now, help me understand the atmosphere here. We aren't talking about a club with a VIP section and bottle service.
Oh, far from it. Picture a beach, moonlight, sand everywhere, and these massive sound systems all rigged up to generators. The music ran all night, sometimes for days. And the music itself had solidified into a specific style. It was fast, usually around 135 to 145 beats per minute, and it was dense.
Gantown.
Layers upon layers. You had that driving 4/4 kick drum, but on top you had melodies that sounded Middle Eastern or Indian. Ethno-trance, they called it.
Okay.
But there was a technological savior that actually allowed this scene to explode globally. The DEET tape.
Digital audio tape.
that beat.
I vaguely remember these. They look like tiny VHS tapes, right?
That's them.
Why does a tape format matter so much? Couldn't they just play records?
Well, think about the environment. You're in Goa, it's hot, it's humid, there's dust and sand everywhere. Vinyl records would warp in that heat and they'd get scratched by the sand. Plus, vinyl is heavy.
Right.
If you're a DJ traveling from London to Mumbai, you can't carry 500 records.
Okay, that makes perfect sense.
DEET tapes were small, digital, and durable. But more importantly, they allowed for this unreleased music culture. A producer in a studio in London could finish a track on a Tuesday,
Put it on a D tape.
fly to Goa on Wednesday, and play it on the beach on Thursday. There was no manufacturing time.
It was the speed of transfer. It sounds like an early version of WeTrance, or just a physical one.
It created an exclusive club. If you had the date, you had the power. And this is when we start seeing the titans of the genre emerge. Juno Reactor, Man with No Name.
The Infinity Project. Yeah, let's listen to a bit of Man with No Name's track, Teleport, after reading the notes. It sounds sparkly. That's the only word I have for it.
That's a good description. It uses these high-pitched arpeggiated melodies that just cascade over each other. It's very euphoric. The Infinity Project's album, feeling very weird. I mean, the titles say it all. They were trying to sonically replicate the psychedelic experience.
Which is the elephant in the room we should probably acknowledge here. The genre is called psychedelic trance.
Right.
The music was designed to work in tandem with altered states.
The music was the guide, the repetitive beats, the shifting textures. It was engineered to keep people in a trance state for hours.
Right.
But as we move into the late 90s, the vibe shifts. The Goa label starts to fade and Psy-Trance takes over.
And the sound gets meaner.
It gets meaner, harder, darker, more metallic.
The article mentions that the center of gravity shifted away from the beaches of India and moved to Europe, and interestingly, Israel. Now, why Israel? That seems like a random jump.
Yeah. It's actually a fascinating piece of sociology. In Israel, military service is mandatory. So you have thousands of young people finishing their service, often in very high-stress situations, and they need to blow off steam.
Of course.
So they're developed this massive culture of traveling to India immediately after the army.
So they go to Goa to decompress, hear this music.
And bring it back to Tel Aviv.
Wow.
Millions of cassette tapes came back in backpacks. And because Israel has this very strong tech sector, the production quality just skyrocketed. They didn't just copy the sound, they engineered it.
And the technology shifts again.
Exactly. We moved from the older, warmer gear to the virtual analog synthesizers.
The article lists things like the access virus and the Nord lead. For someone who doesn't know a synthesizer from a toaster, what does an access virus do to the sound?
Okay. Imagine the difference between a warm, fuzzy blanket and a laser beam. The older analog gear was warm and sometimes a bit unpredictable. The access virus was digital, sharp, and icy. It allowed producers to create these razor-sharp cutting sounds that could slice through a massive sound system.
So the music became more precise.
Clinical, almost. This is where you get hallucinogen Simon Posford. His track LSD is basically the anthem of this shift. If you listen to it, there are sounds that seem to twist and turn inside out. It's not just a melody, it's sound design as a lead instrument.
And then there's Infected Mushroom.
Yeah.
Even I know them.
Of course.
They seem to be the moment where the genre realized it could be huge.
They brought rock star energy to it. Their 1999 album, The Gathering, is arguably one of the most well-produced electronic albums of that decade period. They took the complexity of classical music and mashed it with heavy metal aggression and electronic precision.
But at the same time, the article mentions a split. While some people were speeding up, others were slowing down.
Sibient.
The come-down music. You can't dance at a 145 BPM forever. You need to sleep eventually.
Right.
So you had artists like Spangle, again, that's Simon Posford, mixed with Raja Ram creating Are You Spangled? It's psychedelic, it's weird, it's full of flute samples and water droplets, but it's slow.
Divine Moments of Truth is the track mentioned. DMT.
Not very subtle with the acronyms, were they?
Subtlety was not really the aesthetic of the 90s scene.
So we hit the millennium, the 2000s. The source calls this global expansion. This is where we see the rise of the mega festivals.
Boom Festival in Portugal, Zora in Hungary.
These festivals changed the game.
They did. They stopped being just parties and became temporary cities. You'd have 40,000 people living in a valley for a week.
Hmm.
And because the crowd was so big, the music had to diversify. You couldn't just play one style of trance for 7 days straight.
This is where the subgenres come in. The article lists terms like full-on, dark C, and progressive. Can we break these down? What does full-on sound like compared to dark Psy?
Okay, full-on is the party starter. Think high energy, rolling bass lines, big melodies, vocal samples. It's designed to make you smile and jump. GMS Growling Mad Scientists are the kings of this. Their album, No Rules, is just pure adrenaline.
Okay, and dark C.
That's the horror movie soundtrack. It's faster, sometimes 160, 170 BPM. The sounds are abrasive, scary, almost insect-like. It's designed to be challenging. It's for the late-night, deep trance experience.
So not something you'd put on at a wedding.
Definitely not, unless it's a very specific kind of wedding.
Then you have progressive Psy, which I assume is, well, progressive.
It just means it builds up more slowly. It's a bit slower, usually around 135 BPM, deeper, more hypnotic, less in your face.
And the 2000s also brought a huge change in how the music was actually made. We moved inside the box.
The laptop studio. Software started catching up to hardware. We saw the rise of VST's virtual studio technology.
Okay.
Essentially, instead of buying a $2,000 synthesizer, you could download a program that emulated it.
Which democratized it, right? Suddenly you didn't need a studio full of gear, you just needed a cracked copy of Cubase.
Exactly. And that flood of new producers leads us right to the 2010s, which the article calls the crossover era. And this is where things get a little controversial.
Controversial how?
Well, whenever an underground scene hits the mainstream, the purists get angry.
Always.
And in the 2010s, Psy-Trance started leaking into the world of EDM electronic dance music, the big main stage stuff.
Vini Vici moment.
The Vini Vici moment. In 2016, the duo Vini Vici released a remix of a song called Free Tibet, and it uses this chanting sample, but the drop, well, it introduced the Psy triplet to the masses.
Okay, you have to explain the Psy triplet. I see people arguing about this online. What are we actually listening for?
Okay, so imagine a standard dance beat. Boom, 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 boom. Usually the bass goes boom tish, boom tish. It's a seesaw.
Right.
But a triplet bass line gallops. It goes boom dugga dugga, boom dugga dugga, boom dugga dugga.
It sounds like a horse.
It is a horse. It's a rolling, galloping rhythm. And when Vini Vici put that sound on the main stage of Tomorrowland, the biggest commercial festival in the world, it blew the doors open. Suddenly you had Armin van Buuren and Steve Aoki playing Psy-Trance beats.
And I imagine the old school Goa guys hated it.
They called it cheesy. They said it lost the spiritual depth. But you can't deny the impact. Tracks like Great Spirit or Asterix's Deep Jungle Walk have hundreds of millions of views. It brought a whole new generation into the sound who had never even heard of Goa.
Deep Jungle Walk is a beast of a track. It feels very cinematic.
That's the modern production style. We're in the era of Ableton Live, Serum, just incredibly clean digital production. Everything is perfectly EQ'd. It just hits you in the chest.
So that brings us to the 2020s and beyond. Where are we now? The source material mentions a hybrid approach.
It seems like we've come full circle. Producers got bored of just clicking a mouse. They missed the tactile feel of knobs and wires. So now the trend is using these super powerful computers to record old analog gear.
They're buying the stuff Charanjit Singh was using.
Or modern versions of it. The article mentions the Moog Subsequent 37 and Eurorack modules.
Explain Eurorack. I've seen pictures of these walls covered in cables that look like a 1950s telephone exchange.
That's exactly what it is. It's modular synthesis. Instead of buying a keyboard that makes a sound, you buy tiny individual modules. One module makes a beep, another controls the volume, another controls the pitch, and you have to physically patch them together with cables to make a sound.
That sounds incredibly tedious.
It is, but it creates happy accidents. You plug a wire into the wrong hole, and suddenly you have a sound that no software could ever generate. It brings the chaos back into the music.
So we have chaotic analog noise being controlled by pristine digital software.
That's the sound of the 2020s. It's a fusion. You see artists like Liquid Soul or that collaboration between Vini Vici and Asterix at Hana blending these worlds.
And looking forward, the article throws out some wild predictions. AI sound design and VR.
This is the next frontier. I mean, AI is already starting to generate patches and sounds. The prediction is that soon you might have an AI that can generate a Psy-Trance track in real time, reacting to the crowd's heart rate.
That sounds both incredible and terrifying.
And VR virtual reality. Imagine a psychedelic experience where you don't need to take any substances. You just put on a headset, and the visual world reacts to the music in 360 degrees.
Which brings me back to the core theme we started with, consciousness expansion. Throughout this whole history, from the beaches to the day tapes to the main stage, the claim is that this is a spiritual movement. Does that still hold up?
I think it does, but the method changes. In the 70s, the expansion came from the freedom of being on a beach, outside of society. In the 90s, it came from the sheer intensity of the Goa sound overloading your brain.
Right.
In the 2000s, it was the communal energy of 40,000 people at a festival.
And now?
Now, it might be about digital connectivity, but the goal is the same. It's about using repetitive rhythm to stop thinking, to stop worrying about your job or your rent, and just be present in the sound. That's a form of meditation, whether you're a hippie or a coder.
It's the Dugga Dugga mantra.
It really is.
I want to leave our listeners with a thought that struck me while reading the end of this chronicle. We're moving toward AI-generated music. So, if the purpose of Psy-Trance is to connect human souls and expand consciousness, can a machine truly lead that ceremony?
That is the big question. If the shaman is an algorithm, is the magic still real?
Or maybe the algorithm knows us better than we know ourselves.
Now that's a scary thought.
Something to chew on the next time you hear that triplet bass line. Thanks for taking this trip with us.
Always a pleasure.
We'll catch you on the next deep dive.